Today's topic, knowledge session on H1B and RFPs part 2. Before getting onto the topic, do we have any immigration updates?
I think we can discuss updates after we finish the general topic. Then if there's additional time, then we'll go with updates.
Sure. What are the changes to the Buy American, Hire American order by President Trump, which is now cut into half, becoming just Buy American by Biden?
So in general, we know that the Biden administration is much more friendly towards immigration, and Democrats generally have been in the recent past. When compared to the Trump administration, there have been a lot of news articles also as to how the Trump administration was trying to pretty much not just asylum and family-based immigration, but was completely trying to end H1Bs and tried as hard as possible to end H1Bs, starting right from that memo that you mentioned, Buy American memo. Starting from that, many regulations and executive orders and memorandums were seen as a result of that executive order. To start off with, there was the right to control regulation, which was there even previously, but just became more rigid. Basically, the situation is that if you were a consulting company and that if you were hiring employees out to other companies, and if the employees were working at a third-party site, then there was this tremendous amount of paperwork that had to be submitted and documentation that had to be submitted, and you had to show that you had worked for that person for the entire duration of the H1. Even though projects usually last for 6 months, 2 years, 1 year, you had to show for the entire 3 years period that you are asking for the H1 that you have a PO, which is not the way the consulting business works. So they were trying to end that consulting business model as well. And they also had become much more stringent with specialty occupation. And they came up with this new thing called specific specialty, where they said that if the job requires a bachelor's degree in more than one kind of field, then it's not a specialty occupation. Because, in order to be a specialty occupation and to qualify for a H1, you have to have a job in a specific specialty, which means just one specialty, or a group of specialties which are closely related. So, for example, they were saying that systems analyst position, which have been used in the past, and thousands of applications have been approved. They started denying systems analyst positions because they said that in order to according to the Occupational Outlook Handbook, which is a publication of the Department of Labor, which is what the book that they usually refer to, it said that a bachelor's degree in computer science or engineering or math is required. So it gave a wide array of subjects that could qualify the person to do the job. And they said that because it doesn't say specifically just computer science, it's not a specific specialty. So it's not a specialty occupation, and therefore they were denying the H1. So that was the other thing that they did, specialty occupation RFPs. And also making it harder for students by, whenever you file a change of status from F to H, they were saying that they were asking for every single detail of how the student, whether the student maintained their student status, whether they maintained CPT status, whether they maintained OPT status. And also they came up with a new interpretation of saying that, if the student was on OPT and used up their OPT, then if they joined another program at the same level, for example, if they were doing a master's and they used up all their OPT and then they joined another master's, they wouldn't qualify for CPT. This is a new interpretation that they were giving based, on that memorandum. Pretty much everything is based on that. So then recently, just before the Trump administration had to give up power, they came up with a flurry of regulations. And, some were struck down by courts, and then they reintroduced those regulations by, making amends to them. So, so they did the whole DOL wage thing. They increased the wages by almost double in October. But luckily, the court struck it down because they didn't give enough notice period. For a regulation, you have to have proper notice and comment period, which means that it has to go through a certain process. They didn't follow that process, so the courts pretty much struck it down. Same thing happened with, DOL memo, which was issued, which basically said that consulting companies, if a consulting company is going to place an employee at an end client side, then not only does the consulting company have to file the H1, but also the end client has to file the LCA and the H1. So there was a DOL memo which was issued based on a regulation that USCIS was going to publish, but luckily they ran out of time. So, so many things happened. And then, of course, you have the Trump executive orders banning travel into the US.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a caller online, Mr. Raju.
Hello, Madam Prashanthi Reddy.
Hi, Raju.
Am I audible? Yeah,
yes,
I'm
I
based
can
in
hear
Bangalore. I've been watching these shows and, very, very articulated updates you give, but unfortunately one area that was not covered was business visas. So I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask, but I just quickly wanted to know, with all these new immigration changes that are happening, with the new government in place, is there any impact on the business visas especially for Indians?
So yeah, with reference to business visas, the impact is that you right now, because the consulates are closed simply because they're closed because of COVID. It's difficult to get a business visa.
So yes,
logistically
so it was
speaking.
closed till about 6 months back, but now they have just started giving, and I've got my slot sometime in the next 2 weeks. So I was just worried, is there any new laws or any impact that I need to be aware of?
Right, there's been no change, which is a good thing sometimes, because all the change that we've seen recently is not good change, but bad change. So there's been no change with reference to the eligibility for a B1 or a B2 visa. It remains the same. You have to show that you have no intent to immigrate, because they don't allow dual intent on the B visa.
Right.
And of course, you have to show ties to the US. And
ma'am,
you have to show
sorry
what
to
business
interrupt you, because I'm sure other callers are waiting and I don't want to take much time. But just one last question. Earlier and all, in about 10 years back, when we used to get a business visa for 1 or 2 weeks, and then there was a possibility when the employer or the people that we are visiting, they file an extension locally in the US and we used to get extended. Would that continue even now? Let's say we get stamped for about 2 weeks. Extension of business visas will still be available, or any advice from your side on that?
So nothing has changed on that also. In fact, a lot of people, because of COVID and they couldn't travel, there's been a splurge of extensions of B2s and B1s, and now you can even file it online. So they've made it easier to file. So regulations haven't changed. You can stay for a maximum period of 1 year with increments of 6 months on a B visa. So you can, after you come here, you can always file for an extension of up to 6 months at a time.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Raju. We have other caller, Rohit from Texas. So let's take this call. Hi, Rohit.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. Go ahead with your question.
Hey, I just want to check with Prashanthi about the Dropbox on the Dropbox. So I heard there is no appointment. I mean, I guess the Dropbox are open. So is there any specific reason, or is the Dropbox open for only emergency cases, or it's open for everyone?
The Dropbox is open for everyone. That hasn't changed, and as long as they don't see that they have a reason to interview you personally, then you can get it via Dropbox. The requirements for Dropbox is not changed.
Okay, one thing related to the Dropbox. If the employer is changed, I guess that still qualify with the Dropbox, right? If both the H1 and the H4 both.
So if you previously had a visa, it's called visa revalidation, right? So as long as you previously had a visa and you're revalidating it, no matter what the situation is, you still can apply for a Dropbox.
Yeah. I mean, Dropbox, because the employer has been changed. Earlier it was employer A, now it's employer B. So my question is, even both the principal, like the H1B and the dependent H4, both are eligible for Dropbox, right?
That's correct, because they go together, but they can always, that is discretionary. Remember, the Dropbox is always discretionary, so they can always, ask you to come in person, even if you're eligible for Dropbox.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Rohit. We have another caller, Ravi from Iowa. Hi, Ravi.
Hi.
Hi, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. So actually, my question is like, can a H1B holder like work 2 jobs in this COVID time? Because I heard that what I meant is, let us say we have changed a client and filed an LCA, and then I got another job, and I just filed an LCA for that. And can I work like both jobs working from home? Or how should I do amendment in this case if I take 2 jobs?
So it depends. If you're for example, working for a consulting company and you're doing both the jobs under that same employer, right? You have 2 different projects. If that's the case, then you can just add both the projects to your LCA if the work locations are different. If the work location is same, you really don't have to do anything specific. You can file and you can, as usual, and show the employer worksite or your home as your work location and file it. And then you can take up additional projects. Nothing's stopping you from doing that. You don't need an amendment for that. But if it's 2 different employers, so say you're filing a H1 through ABC company and then you have another offer of a job from XYZ, then you can file a concurrent H1. And a concurrent H1 that's what exactly it is. It's an additional H1 in addition to the H1 that you actually have. So the filing process is the same. It's just that we mark a separate column which says that it's a H1 concurrent. And the hours have to make sense, whatever you're putting in. If you're saying 2 full-time jobs of 40 hours and 40 hours, then the 80 hours, I guess, still makes sense. But if it's more than that, it may not make sense. So you'll have to do 1 full-time and 1 part-time maybe.
Okay.
Thank you, Ravi. Now back to our questions. So what does H1B RFE mean?
So RFE is just a short form for request for further evidence. When you file any petition with USCIS, be it a B2 extension like we were discussing earlier, or you file an L1 or a H1, whatever it might be, family-based petition, there could be a request for further evidence from USCIS before they grant you the certain benefit that they're going to grant you. And then when you send the document, usually there's there is a document sent, and they will give you a time period to respond to it. And if you don't respond within that time, then the case will automatically get denied. And if you respond and you submit all the documentation they're requesting, then they will grant you the benefit. If they're not satisfied with the documentation that you're submitting, then they could send you another RFE. But most probably they won't. Most probably they'll just deny it. It's rare that they send 2 RFEs on the same case. So that's the process for the RFE.